Welcome back. This is the Becoming Abraham podcast. I'm Amadi J. I'm glad you are back with us again. You know, we discuss all things for those who are becoming the first. If you are watching on YouTube, again, thank you. Just please like and subscribe down below. Do all that algorithm stuff. If you're listening to the audio podcast on Apple or Spotify, anywhere else, please just give us a 5-star review. But all of our episodes can be listened to or watched on divemedia.co. That's divemedia.co, and you can follow us on the socials at This Is Dive Media. So get all that housekeeping stuff out the way. So we want to just continue the conversation that we've been having and dialogue and sharing. Really been more of a monologue, but you know, I got to say all these things. But walking through the book of Genesis in the Bible, walking through the life of the man Abram. And tonight will probably be the first of a two-parter. I want to kind of chop this sort of spot that I want to highlight. I want to chop it into two because there's a part in the beginning and there's a part that we're going to pick up on the next episode. All right, I think this is episode 10, so we're finally at double-digit episodes. Maybe we're at 11. I got my road dog over here, so I don't know. His mind's a little sharper than mine. So I don't know. Maybe 10, maybe 11. I only have 10 fingers, so you're only going to get 10, but I feel like this is 11. I feel like we're at episode 11. Anyway, Genesis chapter 14. So we're moving along, right? Abraham and his wife Sarai, they've been thrown out of Egypt and all the different things that happened earlier. In some of the earlier chapters, he got into it with Lot and worked out some stuff with his nephew. But tonight I want to, and it's kind of apropos because of some of the things that are going on globally. In Genesis 14, so I'm kind of give a backdrop. I love to, go through these stories, but I want to give the backdrop just as a reminder. I choose to follow the God of the Bible, and so a lot of these principles are coming from the Bible. So even if that's not your cup of tea, I hope that you're open to listening and, following along. So in the book of Genesis chapter 14, there's a story in that chapter that speaks of a war. And what you had were, I'm not going to go through all the names. Some of those biblical names can get kind of choppy. I'm not here trying to make you a scholar of ancient Hebrew names. But to sum it all up, there were 4 kings that went to war with 5 other kings, right? So it's kind of like a war. The 5 kings were kind of, I guess, just tired of kind of being under the boot of the 4 kings. They had served those 4 kings for like 12 years. And then after that, they started to, plot and scheme. And then on year 14, they go to war. All right, so you got 5 kings on one side, 4 kings on the other side, and they go to war. Not sure how long the war lasted, but the duration of the battle is not necessarily the point I want to hit at. But in like the first maybe 10 verses, it goes through all of the, in Genesis chapter 14, it goes through all of the, sort of particulars of the war. And the result of the war is the 4 kings defeated the 5 kings. So the 5 kings that had been serving the other 4 kings had enough, decided to go to war. They were defeated by the 4 kings that they went to war with. Now, why is this important to the man Abram and the story in which we've been trying to walk through? The 5 kings, one of those 5 kings was the king of Sodom. Now, why is that important? Because Sodom, the territory that encompassed Sodom, guess whose land was within that territory? Our friend Lot, the nephew of the man Abram that we've been talking about. His nephew, when they parted ways, if you go back and listen to a previous episode, I talked about how Abram and Lot, preserved the peace of their relationship and when they parted ways. But Lot's, the area where Lot settled was within the kingdom of Sodom. And then the king of Sodom goes to war along with 4 other kings. They go to war and they lose. So guess what happens? The four kings that were victorious they took all the stuff from the five kings that lost, including Lot and all of his possessions, right? If your country gets attacked or gets raided or gets invaded, guess what? You're now caught up. Now you may say, I didn't go to war. Well, it doesn't matter. The nation that you were a part of went to war. And like I said, it's really kind of apropos because of some things that are going on globally currently right now. We're recording this in 2026. So if you listen to this sometime in the future, you'll say, well, what was going on? In the first quarter of 2026, if this becomes history, you can go back and see what was going on globally in the first quarter of the year 2026, right? So Lot gets swept up. When those four kings come and they take the spoils of war, right? They take possessions, they take cattle, livestock, and they take people, right? Like POWs, prisoners of war, right? They become servants of the victors. So those four victorious kings, they take all the stuff from the five kings who lost. Now, this is amazing because in chapter 14, excuse me, right around verse 14 in chapter 14, Abram is notified. It says that Abram is notified, right? A fugitive got away. Somebody always escapes. It's always it's always somebody that escapes, right? So a fugitive gets away from the war and comes and notifies Abram. Says, hey man, hey, there was war. Again, I'm giving you the 21st century version. Hey, there was a war, and essentially the king of Sodom was amongst the losers, and your nephew Lot has been taken. He's been taken with all of the different people and things and possessions that were captured as a result of them losing the war. Now, I want to pause right there because you can imagine Abram probably knew there was a war going on, right? That war ain't got nothing to do with me. That their war is not my war. That's a critical point to understand. Everyone's war is not our war. Especially when you're doing things for the first time, you want to fight every battle. Every battle's not your battle, all right? If 9 kings, remember it's 4 kings on one side and 4 on the other. 9 kings are going to war. Abram probably knew there was a war going on. It's not his war. So Abram's not involved. Abram, up to this point, up to verse 14, Abram is not involved in the conflict, okay? Every war is not our war. That war amongst those 9 kings, okay? Not 9 just random people, 9 kings. Abram's not involved. Now, the fugitive comes and tells him, hey man, as a result of this war, the 5 kings that went, they lost. And because they lost, their lands, their possessions, people, all that stuff was taken, including your nephew. Guess what Abram does? All right, now I got to get the boys. Now we got to get the boys. So it says Abram rounded up 318 cats that he was rolling with. This isn't, they used cats back in the day. They used to say that. I promise you, that's ancient Hebrew, right? But it says that he rounded up 318 men, and they went to war. 318 men. Abram went to war against the 4 kings who were victorious, not because he was on the side of the 5. See, that's the other critical part that I want to point out. He went to war with the 4 kings, not because he was on the side of the 5 kings. He went to war with the 4 kings who were victorious because by virtue of them taking his nephew, they now made it his war. It's not because he was buddy-buddy with the five kings. Because if you go back and read some things, it talks about how wicked Sodom and Gomorrah was. And, we know some of the stories about Sodom and Gomorrah. So Abram wasn't buddy-buddy with the five kings who lost. He only got involved because his nephew was taken. So see, we have to make sure that we are sober-minded when we see a whole bunch of conflict going on around us. There are going to be times where the conflict, we have to get involved. But there will be times where there will be conflict in our midst, and we do not need to get involved. That is called being sober-minded, right? How many of us have had friends who get into shenanigans? Hey, man, we got to go. Why do we have to go? What did you do? I need to hold you accountable because you could potentially be putting me in danger. Why did you do that? It's different if you were attacked. All right, if you were attacked, let's go handle business, which is what Abram did, right? Okay, my nephew was taken. We got to go round up the boys. Let's go take care of business. But see, there are going to be individuals that are going to tempt us into conflict that is not our conflict. All right? There are ideologies that will tempt us into conflict that is not our conflict. There are going to be wars that are not our wars. Okay? Abram, probably seeing what was going on, knowing that there was a war going on, didn't get involved. It's not his war. Okay? It's not his war. Not until his nephew was taken. Now it becomes my war. So that's the second part. So the first part is, remember, every war is not your war. Every conflict, every fight, every battle is not your fight, is not your battle. There are going to be some that are your fight and are your battles, but not all of them. Okay? And secondly, you have to make sure that you are clear when you do enter and engage a battle, when it comes to your doorstep, okay, that you are not neither for nor against either side. Abram gets involved in this conflict, and that's what I'm going to go into when we talk about the second part of this, about how he articulates, I ain't really for you guys either, the five kings who lost, okay? I'm only getting involved because my nephew is taken. So whether it's political division or sometimes people have these culture wars, whatever is going on, any human division that you can think of, right? Whether it's racial, geographic, in terms of nationality or gender, any conflict that we see going on, right? And we're tempted to I gotta get involved. This fight is now my fight. You gotta ask yourself, why do I feel tempted to get involved in this fight? And two, is this really my fight? Now, the answer may be yes sometimes, but there will be times where the answer is no, and you are going to have to be sober-minded enough to not engage. Because even though the war is going on around you, the war is not your war. And in the same way, Abram was able to be sober-minded until that fugitive tells him that Lot has been taken. He didn't get involved, okay? Because now he's going to war on behalf of another. Because there's an element of narcissism that can be involved in that. If I'm just going to war because I want to impose my belief on another, there's a slight bit of narcissism in there. But Abram, he's going to war on behalf of another. Remember, those 318 men that go to war with Abram, some of them may have lost their lives, okay? And so we can't take the lives of others flippantly. That can happen. How many fights do we know end up with someone getting shot, someone getting stabbed, someone getting put in a hospital? That's what happens in conflict, in battle, and in war, okay? But Abram here in verse 14 and 15, he goes to war on behalf of another, on behalf of his nephew who is swept up into a conflict because of where he now lives. And this is all part of a story that, I'm hoping that you all are seeing the sort of tapestry that's being weaved together, or woven. Woven is the word. Woven? All right, woven together. Right? Lot is swept up because he did not stay with his uncle. Remember, go back and listen to the previous episode. He wanted to break out on his own. Like young people do, I want to break out on my own and go do my own thing. Well, he potentially puts himself in a dangerous environment because he's in the kingdom of Sodom, who then gets caught up in a war, and they lose the war, and because they lose, he's swept up. Now, Abram, exercising tremendous amounts of love and care for his nephew, decides to go to war. That's very, very important. So in the next episode, we're going to continue with this particular spotlight because I want to show you what happens at the conclusion of the war, right? Some of the things that Abram declares and how he shows the kings, even though he fought what looked like to be their war, he clarified to them, I didn't fight your war, I fought my own war. So don't get it twisted, okay? So as we sort of come around third base, I told you this is going to be another short one because I want to break it up into two parts. Remember, every fight, every battle, every conflict, every war is not your war, okay? Got to remember that. And when you do fight those battles, when you do fight those wars, when you get involved in those conflicts or, whatever, make sure that the reason behind it is the right reason. Make sure that your reasoning for getting involved, if you do end up getting involved in a battle, a fight, a war, some sort of conflict, that it is for the right reason. That is imperative, that it is for the right reason. Because there are scars that come from battles, there are scars that come from fights, there are scars that come from wars. And sometimes sitting out a conflict and not engaging and not involved, not getting involved, takes a tremendous amount of sobriety, sober-minded, right? Self-control. When you see things going on all around you and you want to get involved. It takes a tremendous amount. So want to thank you all for listening. Come back for part 2. We're going to continue this discussion about what to do in wars and in battles, because I know it's even hard to do that when you've never seen anyone do that before, when you've never seen anyone sit out a conflict when they could have gotten involved. But it's okay because somebody has to be the first. So thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening. Again, divemedia.co for all the episodes. Again, if you're on YouTube, click below, like and subscribe. 5 stars if you're on the audio. Thank you all for listening and watching, and welcome.